That's what we're relegated to in the United States House of Free Stuff. But today we just voted to extend the funding of government with a continuing resolution, which is going to barrel us towards $1 trillion deficit this year, give or take.
Congressman Chip Roy stood on the House floor with the conviction of a man who had finally lost patience with Washington's games. His words landed hard, a mix of frustration, truth, and warning. He called the chamber the House of Free Stuff, describing it as a place where leaders act as if endless money can be printed without consequence. Roy's message was blunt. America is drowning in trillion-dollar deficits, and no one seems willing to face it. His tone cut through the usual political theater. This was not a speech for applause. It was a challenge to wake up. Roy drew from his own life to make his point real. He told the story of his wife, who was raised by a single mother in Texas and worked her way through college, burdened with student debt, yet determined to pay it off herself. There were no shortcuts, no government rescues, just perseverance. To him, today's calls for student loan forgiveness dishonor people like her, those who accepted responsibility instead of passing it to others. His words carried authenticity because they weren't crafted talking points. They came from lived experience. In that moment, the House fell silent, recognizing the rare honesty of man demanding accountability in a room often filled with excuses.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, is now recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the minority leader.
I thank the Speaker. I'm fascinated to learn that I serve in the United States House of Free Stuff, because that's what I've been hearing nonstop this entire week. There's an unlimited supply of money and resources, apparently, an unlimited supply of dollars that we can continue to print while devastating our economy, devastating the American dollar, and transforming our society by encouraging Americans to believe that there's a free lunch. And there ain't no free lunch. My wife is the product of a single mom growing up in Texas. Her mom worked multiple jobs to send her to college. She worked hard to be able to go to college. She left with $70-something thousand of student loans despite going to 2 top public universities in the state of Texas.
Roy then shifted to one of the most pressing issues for families across America, the crushing cost of higher education. He reminded the chamber that tuition has soared far beyond inflation, and the blame, he argued, lies squarely on government policy. Federal loans and subsidies, he said, have allowed universities to hike tuition endlessly, knowing students can simply borrow more. Instead of helping young people, Washington's approach has created a trap of lifelong debt. Roy's criticism didn't stop there. He turned his focus to a proposal for mass student loan forgiveness, a $1.7 trillion promise that sounds generous, but, he warned, would ultimately land on taxpayers' shoulders. He asked a tough question others avoided. Who pays when government cancels debt? His voice rose with conviction as he spoke for the millions who never attended college, yet are now asked to foot the bill for those who did. His tone was fiery but grounded in fairness, a reminder that nothing in life is truly free. For a few moments, even his opponents seemed to pause, confronted by an uncomfortable truth about the cost of political generosity.
And she's not asking for her loans to get repaid because she went there with a free will. She went there and made a choice. She could have chosen a different path. She chose to take the debt. I did the same thing when I went to law school at the University of Texas. I might not have chosen to go to law school if the loans hadn't been available, and that might be fine. What's the fundamental problem? Why has the cost of education skyrocketed in my lifetime at an inflation rate multiple times over virtually every other product and service in this country except for health care? Why is it up something like 3,000%? Is it perhaps because we're subsidizing the holy heck out of it?
The congressman's frustration then turned inward toward Congress itself. He exposed what he called the illusion of democracy within the Capitol, where only a small circle of leaders decides what bills see daylight, while most representatives are locked out of the process. Massive legislation appears overnight, packed with hidden spending, and members are expected to vote without time for real debate or amendments. Roy's anger was palpable because it wasn't partisan. It was aimed at the entire system. He reminded the public that both parties share the blame for this dysfunction. When discussions of government shutdown surfaced, Roy explained that the panic is largely performative. Over 80% of federal spending continues automatically. The so-called crisis, he said, is often just another political show designed to scare Americans rather than solve real problems. His honesty stripped away the illusion of urgency and revealed something deeper. A government more interested in theatrics than truth.
Just thinking perhaps that there might be a correlation to the availability, massive widespread availability of subsidized student loans, the massive subsidization of K through 12 education and higher ed. Do we think there might be a correlation to why the costs have skyrocketed so much? But no. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle now walk in here and say, we don't want to, we're not the party of big spenders. We got a chart here with $1.7 trillion on it with another chart saying cancel student debt. Who's paying for that? Does anybody in this body give a rat's rear end about who's paying for anything at all? No. Oh no, then they'll come out here and say $3 trillion of tax cuts. They don't care about economic growth and opportunity, but fine. Why don't we actually have a conversation about spending and taxes? No, we don't do that. We just spend money we don't have. That's what we did today in the continuing resolution to keep this government running. Oh my gosh, panic ensues if you dare question whether or not the government must be funded Saturday morning at 12:01 in the morning. What will the American people do? How will they function?
Roy then painted a picture of what responsible governance should look like. Simple, honest, and disciplined, like a family sitting around the kitchen table to balance its budget. In his view, Congress should prioritize needs, make tough choices, and spend within its means. Instead, he argued, both parties have chosen denial, expanding debt while avoiding the sacrifices leadership demands. He spoke again about fairness, focusing on student debt relief. Why should those who work double shifts to pay off their loans, or those who skip college to start a small business, now be forced to cover someone else's tab? He accused President Biden of tossing out arbitrary numbers like $50, 000 in forgiveness, simply to win political favor. For Roy, the issue was not only about dollars, it was about values. Rewarding irresponsibility, he warned, punishes those who do the right thing. His words echoed to the chamber like a verdict. America cannot survive on borrowed money and borrowed morality.
House of free stuff isn't doling out free stuff. No one's in this chamber, of course, just reminding the American people how this place doesn't work. We're now on 5.5 straight years of no amendments being offered on the floor of this august chamber. I'd just like to remind the American people every once in a while that what they saw about how a bill becomes a law is a complete fraud. See, there's a handful of people who get into a room and they decide what you're going to vote on. And the speaker knows it's true, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle know it's true, and my colleagues on this side of the aisle know it's true because they did it when they were in the majority just as much as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle did it when they were in the majority. We get a massive bill dropped on our desk and we say, take it or leave it. Go offer an amendment in rules, they say. Never taken, never accepted. Always pre-chosen, always pre-gamed out. This is deliberation and debate. This is the constitutional order. What value is there for an election certificate if you can't use it? You come to the floor and you want to offer an amendment in good faith to try to make a piece of legislation better, and you can't do it. We got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 people max who decide everything that goes on in this chamber in all of their infinite wisdom. And then we come down and we look at the board and it's party line votes, and then it's walk out on the steps and go give a speech and go to the press and go on Twitter and go on Facebook and go talk about why you're voting no or yes. That's what we're relegated to in the United States House of free stuff.
As his speech built toward its peak, Roy's focus widened beyond budgets and debt to the border, where he said Washington's misplaced priorities are endangering lives. While billions are promised for federal giveaways, he argued the southern border remains in chaos. Families in Texas live in fear, while cartels exploit the government's weakness. Roy accused Democratic leaders of downplaying the crisis and ignoring the communities most affected. His message was sharp. Real leadership means protecting your citizens first. When he finished, the silence in the chamber spoke louder than applause. Even his critics seemed momentarily stunned by his candor. Then came something rare in Congress, a genuine standing ovation. It wasn't political courtesy. It was respect. Chip Roy had cut through the noise with raw truth and moral conviction, reminding Americans what courage and leadership truly looks like.
But today, we just voted to extend the funding of government with a continuing resolution, which is going to barrel us towards $1 trillion deficit this year, give or take. Who knows? Does it matter? Does anybody know what the difference is between $1 trillion or $1.2 trillion? Does anybody know the difference between $29 trillion of debt or $30 trillion of debt? Nobody knows or cares in this chamber. Literally not a lick. We never talk about it. And then each side comes down on the floor and offers more spending for whatever their priority is. Defense, non-defense, mandatory spending, non-mandatory spending. If the unbelievably terrible circumstance occurred at Friday night at midnight of this government daring to pause, do the American people know that about 82% of it is on autopilot with mandatory spending? I mean, does that matter? When you walk out and a gaggle of reporters come up, with bated breath, oh no, there might be a government shutdown. It always gets paid back. 82% of it keeps running. And there's never a serious debate about what's actually happening here in the United States of America. We never sit down like a family or a small business, roll our sleeves up.
Moments later, Senator Rand Paul added his own voice to the growing storm, turning attention toward comments made by Representative Ilhan Omar. His tone was solemn as he recalled a memory of September 11th, a day that scarred the nation forever. He said Omar's earlier remarks appeared to downplay the tragedy, a wound still fresh for many families who lost loved ones. For Paul, this wasn't about politics. It was about decency and remembrance. He argued that by using dismissive language about such a horrific event, Omar had disrespected not only the victims, but also the unity that emerged in the aftermath. America, he reminded the chamber, is built on diversity and respect. But respect must go both ways. The outrage spreading across the country, Paul said, was not manufactured. It was a genuine pain of people who refused to see history treated lightly.
Do you imagine if we actually had to adhere to a budget like any business or American family, and we actually had to sit down, Madam Speaker, at that table and not leave this chamber until we said our budget is $3 trillion or $4 trillion, whatever it is. Here's our income. Here's what we can spend. That's all we can do. Let's figure out our priorities. Well, we disagree. Do you want to fund NEA? Do you want to fund the Department of Education, XYZ? Do you want to fund the military? Do you want to fund specific B-52 bombers? Do you want to fund healthcare? Do you want to fund border security? Make a choice. We never make a choice. Ever. Both parties, by the way. Both leaders. We never make a choice. All we do is preen and posture and come down here with massive bills that have some of our priorities depending on who's in the majority. That's it. And again, we're relegated to being the United States House of Free Stuff. You got to call it free stuff because we're just printing the money to do the stuff. We're down here talking about, we got to cancel the student debt. Well, man, wouldn't that be lovely? Who cares about the people who have already worked hard their whole lives to pay off their student loans, whether they be black, brown, white, male, female? Who cares?
Paul went further, questioning Omar's pattern of remarks that, in his view, seemed to favor foreign interests over American security. Each time the nation's safety was discussed, he said, her words seemed to side with critics of America rather than its defenders. He asked a piercing question. How can a member of Congress speak in ways that comfort adversaries and still claim to represent the American people? His voice grew stronger as he described what leadership should mean. standing with the citizens who entrusted you, not distancing yourself from their grief. When Omar referred to 9/11 as "some people did something," Paul argued that she reopened wounds for millions still mourning. He painted a vivid image of Ground Zero, a place where the air still feels heavy with loss, where names carved in stone remind a nation of its resilience. To minimize that pain, he said, is an injustice to every family that still visits those memorials. Paul called on her to rise above politics and remember her duty as an American leader, to honor, not divide. True leadership, he said, is measured not by rhetoric, but by empathy and loyalty to one's people.
They've worked their whole life. They paid off their student loans. They did what they were supposed to do. Or they're in the middle of paying off their student loans. Oh, no, let's just come down here. One of my colleagues just said $50,000, President Biden. He just picked that number out of the air. $50,000 of free stuff. Here you go. Somebody else chose not to go to college. Somebody else started a business, worked hard, borrowed money to run a business. Guess what? That money also had interest to my colleague from Michigan who was down here talking about, the pain of interest. As if it's not as old as time, as if it's not biblical to say, hey, I don't have the money to do something. I would like to have the money to do something. How might I get the money to do something? I don't know. 1, get a job and earn the money. Save the money. 2, ask for it from somebody who loves you. 3, borrow it. Okay, now what do you do with that?
In his final remarks, Paul turned from criticism to warning. He said Omar's consistent opposition to security measures revealed a troubling disregard for America's safety. This wasn't about one careless comment, he insisted. It was a pattern. If Congress allows such behavior to pass unchecked, he warned, it sends a dangerous message that elected leaders can undermine national values without consequence. Paul urged his colleagues to remember those who gave everything, the soldiers, firefighters, and ordinary citizens who died protecting freedom. To trivialize their sacrifice, he said, is to dishonor the foundation of democracy itself. The world, Paul reminded the chamber, is always watching. When U.S. leaders speak carelessly, adversaries take note. That is why America must draw a clear line to show the world that unity and respect for sacrifice will never fade. His closing words echoed through the Senate. America must never forget September 11th, not just for the lives lost, but for the promise we made never to take our freedom for granted again. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, politics disappeared, replaced by reflection, a reminder that, beyond party lines and policy debates, the heart of nations still beats strongest in remembrance.